I want to show you a little trick that can instantly improve all of your future shots. Hey everyone, Camber here, back with you, and today we're talking about framing and how using the rule of thirds can instantly improve your shots. And if you're new here, this channel is all about teaching you how to use your camera to make good videos, so consider subscribing. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've shown someone a picture that I really liked that I had taken, and the response was, "What kind of camera do you have?" With the thinking behind that question being that the picture can only be good because the camera is really good. Now, I'm not going to lie here and tell you that the type of camera and lens you use aren't important, because better equipment will produce better quality in terms of resolution, sharpness, noise, and those types of factors. But just because you have that better equipment doesn't mean that you'll have better results, because what really makes a great picture is the person behind the camera. And this is where composition comes into play, because you really have to have a good eye as well as a good basis of technical skill and practice to capture a good picture. So the composition aspect I want to cover today is the rule of thirds, which is one of the basic framing tools that, once understood, can drastically improve your own pictures and videos. And what we're doing with this concept is breaking the image down into both horizontal and vertical thirds, which leaves us with 9 equal parts of the frame. And these 9 parts then give you 4 intersecting points where you should place the most important points of interest in your scene. And there have been studies that show that the eyes tend to be drawn more naturally to these intersecting points rather than to the center of the frame. And so the idea is that this will make your shots more balanced, giving the viewer the ability to interact more naturally with the scene. If you hand someone your camera and ask them to take a picture of you, chances are they'll probably hand the camera back with a picture of you right in the middle of the frame, which tends to be quite boring. But when you place the subject in one of those intersecting points, what happens is it opens the picture and makes it more interesting. And it may seem a little difficult at first to frame your shots based on imagining where these thirds might be on your screen, so an option that most modern cameras have is to actually display this rule of thirds grid on your screen. Then you can frame your shots based on those points without the lines actually showing up in your finished product. And aside from cameras, your cell phone can probably do the same thing. If you just go into your camera settings on your phone, you'll probably find an option to overlay this grid on your screen, and that way you can practice on your phone using the thirds and get used to it. So once you have this rule of thirds grid set up on your camera, when capturing a subject, you typically want to place it in one of these intersecting points. For close-up shots of people, placing the eye of your subject in one of these intersecting points is a very effective means of using the grid. But for wider shots, placing the head in one of these intersecting points will probably end up working better for you. However, keep in mind the negative space and place your subject in a section that makes sense. For example, with a person, placing the subject in the top third makes more sense so that you won't have a distracting amount of headroom above the subject. Now, if the subject you're capturing isn't a person, then this leaves you with a lot more room to experiment with which elements to place in the various intersecting points of the frame. And another way to use this thirds grid is with landscape shots. The idea of placing the horizon on either the top third or bottom third of your shot is a way to improve a landscape scene so that it won't be boring. Basically, you're deciding if the ground is the more interesting element or the sky. And if the ground is more interesting, then you'll want to place the horizon on the top third. On the other hand, if the sky is the more interesting element in the scene, then you'll want to place it on the bottom third in order to display that. And then you can start to think about combining these elements of placing the horizon on one of these thirds, as well as using the intersecting points to bring out a subject, which will then create an even more dynamic scene. And if you have multiple points of interest, see how you can frame that scene in order to put those points of interest at these various intersecting points of your frame. And instead of the rule of thirds, it might be better to think of it as the concept of thirds, because there aren't any actual rules. These are just techniques that are known to improve the quality of your shots. Now, if you take these YouTube videos, for example, I'm typically right in the middle of the frame because I want you to focus in on what I'm telling you rather than looking around the frame at everything else. Take this picture, for example. The horizon isn't on one of the thirds, and there's not really any important part of the picture in one of those intersecting points. However, the picture worked for me because having my subject there draws your attention right to them. So if you have a good reason why your subject needs to be placed right smack in the middle, then ignore the rule of thirds and do what works for your shot. And another thing to keep in mind is that you can always make your shots more interesting in post by cropping in to focus on what's more important, as well as putting points of interest along one of those lines or intersecting points. I've done this numerous times when I find things in a scene that I didn't notice when filming and want to improve the framing so I can still use the clip. But now that you understand this concept of the rule of thirds, you'll probably notice that the majority of shots and most of the movies you see are going to be framed using this concept. So then you can start to analyze how various directors use this thirds technique and then start to see how you can use those styles in your own films. And if you can, help me out by leaving a comment and a like, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you soon.